All right. Well, it is June 26th, I think. Is it the 26th
How about the
today?
28th?
28th. Today is June 28th, and we're in Port Huron, Michigan. And we're going to interview Grandma Ev today and find out some things about her life. She's laughing. So, do you want to start out? She's been promising me she's going to tell me her life story sometime, so now we're ready. So, do you want to just start out with your name?
Well, I was born in Port Huron and on November the 8th, 1927. And like I showed you today, the house up across the street from the cemetery. And just so you kind of got an idea then. And then we moved to, now do you want that part about Dad and that being a grocery store? And okay, and he sold vegetables and all that kind of thing in the store, and I was born upstairs over the store, but Dad had to give that up because they came out at that time with a cart with vegetables and everything, and so the man would go around to different homes, and so people didn't have to come to the stores anymore to buy their vegetables, and that was one of the main reasons, I guess, why we ended up going over to East Lansing to live. And so over there, Dad sold insurance, and he had a little popcorn stand on the corner right across from Michigan State. And so at that time, the Depression came along, and so Dad figured that kids and people would always have a nickel to buy popcorn, but really they didn't. So we came back to Port Huron. I finished kindergarten over there, and so then I came back over here, and we moved in with my grandpa Shoemaker, and ended up, there were 8 of us that lived in there with my grandpa and my dad's sister Hazel and her husband Yeager, and their last name was Mayer. And then this uncle also had his sister living over here. I never knew why, but they were both from Point Edward. And then I had my cousin. So anyway, it all ended up there were 8 of us there. And then a few years later, I moved across the street, and we rented an apartment over there, and that's where I went to the Monroe School, and then I had scarlet fever, and can still remember that.
How old were you when you got scarlet fever?
Probably in the 2nd or 3rd grade, I figured there. And because I can still remember seeing, like, you doing pictures where there's like a wheel that goes around and around like that, and it must have been my fever or something that, made...
You were dizzy?
It's like some kind of a circle going. I suppose, maybe it was just from high fever or whatever. But anyway, and then Dad, I showed you the little hospital down there. And so Dad delivered, at that time when we came back, my dad and my mother went to work for my grandpa. And he owned the OK Cleaners there, and Dad went up to K-Pac and Sandusky and all around the Thumb and everything, and picked up clothes and brought them back to the cleaners. And then he would deliver them. Well, I was sick in the wintertime, and of course I always, you want to see your parents, and they couldn't come in the hospital. They had to stand outside of my window, and then we would just wave at one another, and you couldn't really, I don't remember whether we talked or not. I don't think we could be hollering, when you're in the hospital. But anyway, Dad, I remember, always had such a terrible time trying to get back through all the snow and the bad weather just so he could see me, before it was dark and everything. But remember that, and then I found a little paper that I'll try and find it sometime and show you, but it they charged me $1, or Dad $1.35 or something like that for each day I was in the hospital. And
how long were you in the hospital? Do you remember?
I don't know. I'm guessing probably maybe about 18 days or something like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the thing that I remembered the most, I had a Mickey Mouse watch that I could wear. Well, when I left the hospital, I had to give them the watch, and then they dipped it in a solution so there couldn't be any germs, you know. When I went out with it, well, you know what happened to the Mickey Mouse watch. That was the end of it. So anyway, and then when I went home, everybody had brought presents to me. Well, they didn't want to bring them down to the hospital because I would have had to leave them all at the hospital. So when I got home, I just had presents all over the table, dining room table, and all over. So that was pretty neat. So let's see. Then from from there, I went to the Monroe School, and I showed you that. That's on Lion Street. And then Grandpa Shoemaker, and his first name was George, and he had been ill. He had had a stroke, and he was still living over there on 10th and McPherson at the home where we had first come back to.
This is your dad?
This is my dad. And so guess I should tell you that his wife, or my dad's mother, had died when she was very young. And it was after she, of course, had my dad. But I don't really know what happened to her. But her name was, I think her name was Elizabeth Shoemaker, if I'm not mistaken.
Your grandmother?
Yeah, Grandmother Shoemaker. But, I mean, see, my mother was 21 when she married my dad, about that age, and she never knew my grandma either, so she was fairly young when she passed away.
Mm-hmm.
But then Grandpa died after having had a stroke, and he was bedridden for some time, and then he passed away. And as I told you, at that time they had the body in the front room, and you know, the family sat around all night and stayed with the body. And so anyway, then after that, well, then Dad inherited this house here on 10th Avenue, and my aunt got the one next door, and then next door was my grandfather's gas station, and I have a picture of him standing outside, and he had all pretty flowers and shrubs around and stuff like that. So then after he passed away, Dad just made that into a store, someplace that could bring money in for him, because Mom and Dad never had, you know, much money, and I can remember them making like 50 cents a day, and you know, both working for Grandpa was probably pretty lucky that they could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And Mother was a seamstress down there at the cleaners. So I used to hang around there a lot and knew all the people and had fun with them, and just, you know, good time. I was, you know, probably only 5th, 6th grade, something like that. Then I hung around at my grandmother's over there, Kitty Corner, and because Mother working, I would have had to been home alone. And so I spent a lot of time with them, and they always called my grandpa and I that I was his shadow, because I guess I was with my grandpa a lot, you know. He always thought a lot of me. Of course, everybody did. I'm the only child. And so, anyway.
So tell me your parents' names then.
Okay, so my dad's name was Elmer George Shoemaker, and he was born February 28th in 1899. And Mom was born in, I'm going to have to look this one up for sure, because I think she was born in Ohio, but my relatives came from Indiana and Ohio, and that's why I know they lived Yeah, because I think she came from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm thinking now of pictures that I've got, and it was a picture taken of their home in Cleveland, and then they moved up here, and Mother's birthday was January the 13th in 1907. And Mom never finished high school. She was getting ready to graduate, and they moved up to Port Huron to live. And so my grandfather, went to work for Grand Trunk. So he worked there until he got the cleaners, and then he ran the cleaners up until the time he passed away, which was in 1947. So, anyway, what else can we think of?
Let's see.
Well, my dad had a sister, Hazel, and then her husband was Jaeger, and then they had a son, George. It was George Mayer, and that was the only relatives I had to speak of. My mother had a sister, and Elma. And she was the oldest of the three of them, and then they had the brother Gross, who was the youngest of the three of them. And Uncle Gross died when he was, probably in his early 60s. So, and Elma retired from Cunningham's drugstore. She'd worked downtown here in Port Huron, and then she went down to Troy and Rochester and worked down there, and then she came back up and lived with my grandmother when she retired. But I guess the thing I remember after my grandpa died, and then Grandma was all alone there at that time, they bought a TV set. So, of course, that was a big deal, and it sat right in the archway, like in there between the living room and the dining room, but that's all the farther the wire would go. So everybody sat around there, and of course we went down there about every night, and turn it off.
So when was that was that the first TV that you ever
Yeah,
got to see?
that was a novelty for anyone to have a TV set. And she got the TV set was that there was a store downtown by the name of Kimball's that sold appliances, and what they would do, my grandfather would sell or would clean Mr. Kimball's clothes, and then they'd keep track of the bill, and then when my grandpa wanted an appliance out of the store, well, then they would trade it for the dry cleaning that he had done for Mr. Kimball. So afterwards they were still doing that, so that's how Grandma got her TV set was through that switch. Well, then we'd go down there, and of course that time prize fighting and all that sort of thing were big things. There was hardly anything on TV, you just had to hit certain times that you could watch it. But
what year was that, do you think?
Oh, well, I was pregnant for Kathy, so that would have been in probably 50 and 51 that we went down a lot. So,
talk about what it was like during the Depression. What was it like for your family? What do you remember?
Well, I think I was so small that I don't think I really realized. To me, it was fun being in that house down there on 10th with all the family, and I guess I was just so young that I didn't notice that anything was really wrong. See, I would have only been in the first grade, and it was just fun having a lot of people around. And my uncle sold yeast. That was his job. He sold blocks of yeast to Aikman's store. You probably don't even remember Aikman's bread. And that was down at the south end of town, and he sold yeast to them, and my aunt worked at Collinson's. It's a woman's store that was downtown. But I guess the thing that I noticed the most there, that hose, you just couldn't get them, and what she would do when she got a run in her nylon, or it would have been silk socks then that they had, that she would sit there and darn these socks all the time, and they had the big wooden spool you put up, and she'd sit there and mend her socks so she could wear them to work, because no one had any money, but you never heard anybody say anything about that. But and as far as wanting things, I don't ever remember wanting anything. Because you made your own fun. Like sitting here when we moved up here after Grandpa Shoemaker died. And I can remember, if I look right straight over there where the teachers park now, it was a baseball diamond. And I could sit here and, like, after we were done eating, I'd look over and the kids over there, so you go over and you play. We played football, we played baseball, kickball, and all those things, and skated in the wintertime. And down here at Palmer, and summertime we swam up at Lakeside all the time. Sometimes you rode your bike, and sometimes you walked up and back. So you didn't think anything of walking then.
Do you remember when you got, like, your first bicycle, or?
Yeah, I can remember that. But you didn't graduate from a small bike to a full bike. I ended up with a full bike, and I was probably maybe 9 years old or something. And Dad had to take, where your pedals are. He had to put wooden blocks on the bottom of them so I could touch them going around, until my legs were long enough to fit right on the pedals. But you didn't think anything of that. If you did that now, you'd get teased to death that, that you were poor or something. But everybody was poor and in the same boat. So it didn't matter. But another thing I remember is my Dad always drove the OK Cleaners truck, and that's what we traveled in. And, of course, you didn't go for rides like you do now. But then, remember, we lived here, and Dad came home with a Ford, and of course it was a second-hand Ford. But what they always said to me, well, you probably don't remember, but you thought that we should get a chauffeur to drive that car because it was so nice, that having, I thought we really had a lot of money that we could get a car, and drive around in it. But we used to travel around in that truck sometimes and out in the country, and you never could see anything. You had to peek out the back window because there were panels on the side, And so anyway, yeah. And one thing here was where you look out the window here. This house was not here, and the house next door was not here, and that was my father's vegetable garden. And he raised tomatoes and corn and all kinds of vegetables all along there. And none of this was in here. It was just all plain grass and everything. And then the kids used to come down, and the second house down here wasn't there either, and they used to take a shortcut right through there.
So how long did you live in this house? Obviously you live here now, but...
Yeah, well, I started in here in the second part of the 4th grade. And so it must have been 9 or 10 years old, I guess. So, but at that time there wasn't anything over there. And it was just basically all woods. None of those houses were in there. And I know every spring Dad would take us over, Mom and I, and we'd go over looking for jack-in-the-pulpits and violets and all those things, And one day I said to Dad, how come every time we come over in the woods that you carry that big stick with you? And he said, well, there's snakes in here, And I think that might have been the end of us going over to the woods. Anyway, that started building up over there right after the war, and that's why that all got started. And that would have been probably in 46 or something like that those houses started going up.
What was Christmas like when you were
Well, Christmas is always a lot of fun, And we always went down to my grandmother's house on Christmas Eve. And we sat around there, and usually Christmas Eve, Grandma, that, like, maybe New Year's if we were down there too, but that was when she would make this, I don't know, milk stuff, and she cooked oysters in it. I can remember that. I can remember sitting there watching them swallow those oysters, But they just loved it, especially my dad. And Limburger cheese. My grandpa, they always liked Limburger cheese and stuff like that. But that was kind of the big thing. And then, of course, you had your turkey and things like that. But then Christmas Eve, all of a sudden, we'd all be sitting around, and then Dad would say, shh, shh, be quiet. And everybody would get real quiet. And then he'd say, I hear bells. I hear them on the roof. And then, it's like this. So then I think we better go. And by the time he got home, you were so hyper because he'd heard that sled up on the roof and everything, but. And then Dad was a great jokester, and he always liked to tease, and he'd say, oh, now, I got something, and, I don't know if you can hear it or not, or, yeah, it's kind of loud, and you couldn't figure out, and it might be a radio. He always had you guessing or something like that, and great jokester. And Dad played the piano. He was, remember that? He was very, very good at playing piano. He played it all by ear. He couldn't read any music, speak of, he always just sat there and played a lot of music and a lot of songs. We had a baby grand piano in this house. My mother was forever wheeling it between that front window and over here. Dad would come home and he'd never know where the furniture was going to be. I think that's where your mother picked it up.
Probably.
Because I never move anything once it's in its place. So. But Christmas was always nice. I have no bad thoughts about my family.
Do you remember any chores or special things you had to do or responsibilities you had? What did you have to do as a little girl?
Dishes. Always had the dishes to do, and the table had to be set when my folks got home, around 6 or after 6 from work. And my job was to mow the lawn, and that was a push lawnmower, and I can remember doing it on days like this. And of course I was home all day, but I'd come in and I'd just flop on the damn port like this. I thought I was going to die because I was so hot, but that was one of my things, and I don't remember about groaning about it. And then as I got into my teens a little bit more, my responsibility was to clean the whole house on Saturday. My mother and dad both had to work. And so I had to clean the whole house. And those days she had a braided rug in those 2 rooms. Then you had to get a dust mop and go all the way around these rugs, plus vacuum and everything. And that's why I said I'd never have wooden floors because of that. Because I just hated that so much. Trying to get underneath furniture, with your mop and all that stuff. And so anyway, after I got the house cleaned, then they were done at noon. And so I would walk from here down to where I showed you where the OK Cleaners was. I would walk down there so I could just walk. Well, I don't know what's in there now. Well, it's right. It was Powers Hamburger. Do you remember that being down there at the crossing? Well, that was brand new, and you used to only spend a nickel for a hamburger, but that was a big treat. And I would walk all the way down there just so I could go over there and have a hamburger with them. And then we go grocery shopping and right there and come back home. And that was just different.
Mm-hmm.
You look now, and you always got a bus. Beach bus was out here on this corner, and then you could go up there on the next corner on Stone and get a bus, so you always had a bus ride one way or the other.
Did you have any pets, special pets
Yeah,
growing up?
well, we had Sandy. No, that was our dog over there, wasn't Tippy was the black one. Well, I had Ricky. I had Ricky, and he came from right over here on Stone Street. And I can still remember that. It was Schutzlines that sold us the blonde cocker, and then we had a black one later on. And
What
my
kind of
folks
dog?
did.
What kind of dog was he? Do you know?
Cocker Spaniel.
Mm.
So, yeah.
What was it like when you were in school? What did you like school, or were you?
Not particularly.
No.
Didn't want to be honest.
Yeah. Were you involved in anything like extracurricular things?
Well, kind of like basketball, but of course I was always guard. I couldn't get the ball as high as the basket when we were playing basketball. Oh, and I was a cheerleader, and with two of my friends, and I even have my big G someplace here, and the next year when we decided we weren't going to run, well then they had the next teams of cheerleaders get up there, and they weren't as good as we were, So then we talked to the team, well, can't we run now? And well, then, we got up and did a yell, I remember, and everybody claps. Well, then we wanted to run, everybody but then the teachers wouldn't let us, so that was my big thing, I guess, so. My worst subject was English. I said I had trouble with adjectives and adverbs and pronouns and dangling participles and all that stuff. I hated that. But what else? I don't know. Never liked to read. Still don't, do I? So anyway.
You didn't have any favorite books as a child, or anything?
Never
That you
liked
really
to,
liked
just
reading?
didn't like to read.
Mm-hmm.
My mother loved it. She used to, as a kid, she used to go down to the library and she'd get a bag filled with books. And then when she had to go to bed, she'd take the flashlight and she'd pull the covers up over her head and read half the night, And but it just did not rub off on me.
Do you remember her reading into adulthood?
Always.
And as long as you knew her,
Always
she
read,
always
and I guess when I think of her now, I was reading when she was over at U of M Hospital. That really is what I had to keep taking her books over to read when I'd go to visit her, And then near the end, just the books. She'd read all these little pocket books. They were the ones that had the little clown on the end of it or something, was a special kind. Well, then we were getting into the later books that were written later years, and they were they weren't very nice books. She liked just plain little love stories. Well, then they were, I suppose, getting too much in detail with affairs and stuff, and she was getting real mad at me because I was bringing these terrible books to her, and they were the same one with the clown, but they were just, that's the way books were changing then, No, Mother loved to read right up and as long as she could.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember did your family ever take vacations anywhere? Do you remember any special places you went with your family?
I guess the reason I remember it the most, I guess I do remember it, but we went over to Niagara Falls, and it was a group of us, with my grandparents and Aunt Bunny and Uncle Gross were all in the picture, so, you don't remember who's with you, but, yeah. as far as that, he didn't have the money to go anyplace. Really. So, I guess that's about all. We might have gone to the zoo or something, but that wouldn't be very often either. Yeah. No, and then what we did in the fall was, my dad loved to hunt pheasants, and my mother was right there with them with her gun. And when they got done with work, we would go out in the car. It'd still be kind of daylight, and you'd what you call road hunt pheasants. And we'd look out the windows, and you'd go past the cornfields that had been cut down, and lots of times you'd see a pheasant, and then you'd get out, shoot them, and Mother would can pheasant, but I didn't like that. I love pheasant, but when it was canned, it got kind of that gunky stuff in it, and it just I forgot about that one.
All right. Well, were you ever in Girl Scouts?
Yes, I was in the Girl Scout Drum and Bugle Corps, and you have a picture somewhere around here of that too, I guess. But the big thing I remember about that thrilled me was we used to be in parades, and I had a couple of my friends that were in the parade with us. But we practiced down at the old armory, and I remember our instructor came over from Canada. He was real good with bands, a lot of good Canadian bands, and so he came over and taught us. And I always wanted to play the drum, but I always ended up with the trumpet. And so we used to get in our parades, and we'd walk down and go into Pine Grove Park. And I guess the biggest thrill was my dad when he said, I heard this band coming down the street, and he said, I thought that must be the Boy Scout Drum and Bugle, and here was the Girl Scout Drum and Bugle. I was just so thrilled to think that we were that good. And then another time this reminds me that Santa Claus had come to town. And, I should have showed you where, it was right there on the corner of, when you come over 7th Street Bridge, and those new places are built right, well, my dad had a gas station right on the corner at that time. And he was there, and he could hear the band coming down the main street, and then we came down, and we were going back around, going over 7th Street Bridge, and he was thinking, I wonder if Evelyn got down to see, Santa Claus come, and when he looked, here I am with one of the banners coming down right at the beginning of the parade, so he always got a big kick out of that. So those are the things that you remember. I probably wouldn't have, but he would remember things like that. And then he always used to call me Boots. That was my nickname for my dad, was Boots, because my maiden name was Shoemaker. Mm-hmm. And so I was called Little Boots a lot of times. And I had a lot of nicknames. My Aunt Hazel, what she called me, her dumpling. And Aunt Elma called me Babe, and I have no idea why. Uncle Gross called me the captain a lot of times because he let me steer his little boat he had in the river, so I had a lot of nicknames. Let's see.
So do you want to tell us about your first crush? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. That was Curly LaForge was his name.
And how old were you?
I was Garfield went to 9th grade in those days. Now it only goes to 8th, so I'd have been in the 9th grade. And I can remember it was winter time, and he walked me home from Palmer Park. And we got out here, and we, just gonna say, well, he wanted to kiss me. And I just, like you do. Well, I don't know, and so we went back and forth quite a while. So finally I gave in. But that didn't last, well, it lasted. He's a good dancer, because we used to have dances over at Garfield all the time. or on Friday nights, and so he was a real good dancer. But the thing that was the end was when we graduated, he came, stopped by the house, because he just lived right over here in the next block on Myrtle Street, and he came to the door and he'd been drinking, and that was just unheard of. No one drank in those days. But he had been drinking, and I understand his dad was quite a drinker, so he probably was around it, you know. So anyway, but that was the end of Curly LaForge.
So you mentioned that you used to go dancing a lot. Did you go? Were there dances a lot around that you would go to as a teenager?
No, they had them when I went to high school. They had them a lot, and they used to have them up at the pavilion up at Lakeside. There was a big pavilion up there, and they used to roller skate, and then they had dance music up there too. But I was just kind of young to do that, to go up, up there, but. Would have liked to. I don't know if I ever danced up there or not. Went up and watched him, but yeah. But
yeah, what kind of dancing did you do?
Oh, I don't know. Whatever they did, you know. There's just certain steps you do. You did the walk, how you used to do, and whatever. And that was more in Garfield. I don't know. Probably over at Garfield, you more or less did the box, which used to be the waltz or something, but you did the walk, and you walked on. In fact, you can tell who the senior citizens are because they still walk when they do it, and you kind of back, and then you walk some more, and then just kind of back and walk some more, and then you did the dip. There was a dip, and in fact, the other day when I had Miss Keene up at Ruby Tuesdays, and George Mosier from the Mosier Jewelry Store, he came in, and then there was this other fellow that was Bob Relkin, not Relkin, Bob, anyway. I knew the name at that time. But anyway, I said, aren't you Bob? And he hadn't recognized me, and then he looked at me and he said, Evelyn Shoemaker. And he says, boy, could she dance. So, what we used to do in high school, though, up there, it was called Riggs. And it's right up there where you turn to go down Keewatin, and they made it into, is it a beauty shop now? Mm-hmm. And that used to be like an old gas station or something. Well, they had an ice cream bar, and there in the back was a little dance hall, probably about this big. And we danced all the time there. That's why he would say that. And he was from St. Stephen's, And of course, the guys from St. Stephen's always danced better than the ones from high school. But
so, what were your favorite? Did you have any favorite songs or music groups that you liked when you were growing up or when you were a teenager? What kind of music did you listen to?
Well, I think I kind of liked them all. They ran a long time now, and you could understand the words in those days. Now you don't know what the heck they're talking about. And but I guess String of Pearls would have been one of my first ones, and that would have been Curly's and mine, Curly LaForge, because that was popular at that time, and you associate those things with them. And what else was there? Oh, and then there was Elmer's tune, so that of course would have been related to my father, with his name being Elmer. And just lots of, I got a basement filled with the same records still down there. So yeah, we pretty much liked all of them. Of course, the funny ones would be Hutsit Rolfson on the Rilla with a raw suet, So talk about your silly songs. That was a real popular one. What was the other one? Down in the meadow in the itty bitty pool, swam 3 little fishies in the mama fishy too. So see, they were goofy too. But I think during World War II, you had a lot more love songs going on, and don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. And they were associated to the kids that were away in the war. It was a tough time. But yet, I don't think it's tough at our age. My cousin, George, was over in Germany, but I don't think the kids back home really, you sensed it. You weren't with it like you are now. Now you live it on TV, and that's not good, And over there, you didn't know half the things that were going on, so you never really lived it. I can remember being in study hall when D-Day came, because they announced it over the speakers that we had landed over there, and so that was a big time. And then I remember one time I came home and asked my dad if I could go see Billy Day off. And he said, sure, you can. And so I came back. He said, well, did you enjoy the movie? And I said, we went to see Billy Day off at the depot to go to war. And he thought I was talking about a movie, But we used to go down to the train station sometimes and see the guys off and stuff. But a lot of guys of course, I was a senior when the war came to an end in 1945. And in fact, our senior play, I think, was in April or May, and I remember President Roosevelt died at that time, and so it was all mixed in together, right at that time. And I know a lot of the hardships, which we didn't, you couldn't have all the gas you wanted to do things with a car. And I remember Tom Burns, he ran a gas station, and he was giving people gas. You were supposed to have a ticket to, or like A stamp or a B stamp or whatever it was, to get maybe 5 gallons of gas or something. But things we couldn't do, and like everybody used to go down to Eastland Park, which was right down almost into Detroit, and we couldn't do that because we didn't have the gas to go down. You didn't have the tires; they were so, worn out and everything, and everyone had real nice yearbooks up till our year, and then we just got an old cardboard cover because you couldn't get real expensive things anymore, and it had an airplane on the outside of it. And they used to go and have big dinners. We couldn't do that. We all ended up at the Congregational Church because that's the only thing. I don't know why but they couldn't afford it, or I don't know where we would have gone out here to eat anyway. It doesn't seem like Port Huron never really had a big place to go and eat. I imagine what they probably did was go down to Detroit or someplace to eat. Just something different, But we couldn't do all that. In fact, we were complaining about that when we met last Tuesday with our gang, that, we had to go to the Congregational Church to have our, dinner. And it's those little things you remember, and you did it that day. Because you just couldn't do anything. Mm-hmm. And you had to have a ticket to get a pair of shoes. And remember the Oleo, when you didn't have butter, they came out with Oleo, and it was white, and then they put a little package of orange in with it, and then you sprinkle the orange on the white pound of Oleo, and then you had to rub it all in so you'd have yellow Oleo. I never thought of that till just then, but in fact, sitting down at Ruff's ice cream parlor, I used to sit there and watch the girl put it in there, and so there's just lots of things that you couldn't have those last years or two.
Was there anyone close to you or in your family that was in the war?
Only my cousin George, as I said, and he was over in Germany. And,
Did he come home?
mm-hmm. Yep. And a lot of kids never graduated. And then I know right after, I guess probably get into Tom Burns, huh? That's when I met Tom Burns, was when I was in the 11th grade. And so I was down here ice skating when I met Tom. And he lived over on Forest, which we didn't get there either. But anyway, that's where I met him. And shouldn't tell him what he looked like, should I? Do you remember? Coming down the snow. First time I saw him. You didn't hear me, did you? So anyway, I guess the big deal there, I got to wear his St. Stephen's sweater because he was a good basketball player. And so we dated and had an argument for prom. So I didn't go to prom with him. I went with Paul Maringo instead. Do you remember Maringo's appliance store at all? No, they used to be right in here where the billiard place was, and then the shoe store. They were in there, but you're probably too young for that. So anyway, we got together afterwards. So. Went with him. He went in the service, and he went in with his best friend Darwin Kearns. They went in the 82nd Airborne. And
What year was that?
Probably 46. Because he graduated in 45, so it could have been late 45 or 46. You know, they were in the service in, so. Then, he came home on furlough. We got engaged. And then he went back, and he was out because we were married in 48, September the 11th, 48, at the rectory at St. Stephen's. Yeah, 82nd Airborne is a paratrooper. And so we were married St. Stephen's Rectory, which is no longer there. And then he went, he got his job when he came back. He drove for Banner Linen, which was towels and stuff. You went around to businesses and picked up towels. And then he got in as an apprentice in the Times Herald. And that's where he stayed the rest of his life, was with the Times Herald, and got up to be like a supervisor, I guess. And so, then our first place was down there on Military, where I showed you that brown shingle place, across from Medical Village. And so then our best man, Darwin, was killed coming home on the expressway. He and Miss Paul Maringo and a couple of other guys had gone down Christmas shopping, and on the way back a big semi went across the median and plowed into them, and the three of them were killed. And this Paul Maringo was driving, and he was the only one that came out of it, and it was a very sad event for the whole town. These were all young men, you know. We had only been married in September, and this was like in December, and so it was all very sad and terrible thing to happen. So anyway, then it would have been 1950. Then I got pregnant for Kathy, And so then we had to move up here because, of course, it was too small down there, and we didn't want to be down there anyway. So Dad gave us a plot of land right there on the corner of 10th and Shoemaker, and so we had that built, and so she came along. And so that was fun. She was a good baby, and had lots of fun. And I remember, I guess on your birthday, it must have been probably your first or second birthday. I remember it was hot, like it always is, and we bought our first fan. Now that's how you remember crazy things like that. And then we also, on your birthday, had tornadoes go through here and wipe out a lot of trees, and a lot of damage was done here at that time. And in fact, they had to send the kids home, the neighbors home, from the party because of it getting so dark and so terrible, And then we went to my grandmother's because we had no electricity. We went down there on Stone Street to my grandmother's house and continued the party in the evening, and all the relatives came for that. And I don't know, we did a lot of work around there. That house didn't have anything around it, so we had put all the shrubs around, and Tom put in the driveway and the sidewalk, and had pictures with her playing in the sidewalk where the dirt was, and we planted our trees, which we got from Tom's grandmother. We planted them in the front yard, and so just little things like that meant a lot. And so anyway, then what else? Then we decided when Mick came along then, and
When was Mick born?
well, Kathy was born on June the 30th, 1951, and Mick was born on June 13th, 1955. And so then that's when we decided we were going to move over there. Woodstock, that was just starting to develop. So we were over there for 18 years probably, weren't we? Because Nick was only a couple years old, I guess, when we moved in. And you had graduated when everything fell apart. And so is there anything special you want to know about that? Can you think of anything?
Did you work when the kids were growing up?
No, I was home all the time, and just about October, I decided I wanted to do something, and Kathy had graduated, and so I went to Allenbrook's Flower Shop, and I had played with kids, the Allenbrooks, at one time, and so I had a good in because the mother knew me, Mrs. Allenbrook, and so I got a job there. And then in October was when Tom and I broke up, and we came over here, all of us, and the dog.
To this house?
Moved in December the 3rd.
Exodus Day.
And so we all made a quick exit, and I don't know if you want to get into that or not.
It's up to you.
It's not much. I took Tom to work, and poor Tom didn't know what was happening, but came back and went in and asked Mick if he wanted to stay, and because this just all happened real quick. Things were not good at the house, and Kathy knew it, and she'd heard things that had been said to me, hadn't she? So anyway, she came over to Mom and said, "We got to get Mom out of the house." And so they came out to Allenbrooks, and Mother said, "Do you want to come and live with me?" And I said, "Yes." So the next day we all packed up, and my aunt came, my mother came, and I kept the car, and we all packed everything we did, put it in the basement, and Kathy and I slept in that room, and Mother slept here, and mixed up on the Davenport, and so anyway, and of course the family across the street from us was George Friend and his wife Joanne, and then they had a couple months younger than Mick, and his name was Dan, and then they had a girl that was a little bit younger than Kathy, was Judy, and then there was Mike, and the whole neighborhood, they played together because we had picnics, and because they all moved in a few years, and so we all knew each other, and so we took turns having picnics on holidays, and so George and Joanne and Tom and I used to play bridge a lot with them, and then when Tom went to meetings, I went over there and sat with them a lot, and so the kids played, there and whatever, but Tom wasn't home very much. And so anyway, then things, as I said, just came to a head. Well, then, meanwhile, before we moved, George's wife died very suddenly, and she was 40 years old and had a heart attack and just was gone like that. And so it was another sad time for everyone. And so we tried to help out as much as you could, because Judy was 16, and so she was the head one in the house, so we all tried to help, and so anyway, a lot of complications set in, and so we got through that, and I went over and warned George what was happening, because he had red hair, and I knew that wasn't going to be a good scene when they all got together and it was dropped on them. So anyway, we all got through that, and so anyway, then we moved over here. Well, then he came over, I guess it was after Christmas time, and so he came over and brought gifts or whatever, and brought the kids with him and whatever. And so I guess it was February or March, he asked me if I'd like to go out, and so I went out. And of course, we were like family, and I used to see him standing out there with Joanne, and he was always very loving and caring and nice man, and so I knew what George was like. So, when we got together, I had known George for about 18 years, because they moved in shortly after. So.
How old were you at that time?
Oh gosh, probably 42 or 43. And anyway, then we got married in August, and August 15th.
1940.
70. 1970.
Oh, okay.
It would be 1970. Yeah. And so we moved down to Harper Woods, because he worked over in Southfield, and he also worked up here at Prestolite, so he was in between. So we were like halfway when we were in Harper Woods. So we lived down there for 2 years, and Kathy was up here living with the twins, and Mick and Danny had been complete enemies when we lived across the street from one another, and they had to live together, and they did quite well. And so anyway, we had been to Florida, and this was in 72, and it was our second trip down there, and so in 72 we came home, and George was hurting. His legs were bothering him and things, and so he went to the doctor, Dr. Bridge, and so anyway, he went in for a physical, and it was like kind of springtime, and the doctor thought it was the air conditioner blowing on him because he rode in the car so much, and he said it was that. But he said, you smoke, you go in, you have a chest x-ray. So we got a telephone call and to come down from Harper Woods, and so he called us into the office and showed us the x-rays. Well, it showed something in the bottom of the lungs, and so they decided, with us being in Harper Woods, that they would set up an appointment for Ford Hospital. So George had to teach me how to drive through all that mob to Ford Hospital, because that's where he would be. So I drove down there twice a day, and they did tests and everything, went up in the groin and everything, and so they thought what he had was like cancer of the lungs, you know. Well, come to find out, it was in the kidneys. And what had happened about 6 years before that, he had some problem with bleeding in the urine, and he went to a doctor here, and he told him it was a cyst, and just to lie down and rest. And when he didn't feel well, just lie there and rest and take it easy until he felt better. Well, when Ford's had me bring the x-rays down, there was a growth right there, and there wasn't anything they could do for him. So he lived for 6 months after that, and then he died. So that's how I ended up with, being down in Harper Woods and everything. So then we moved up on Holland Avenue, right across from the water tower.
I remember that.
Do you remember that one now? Yeah. And so moved up with the kids, and so I lived there with them, just broken-hearted, because he was just a neat guy, and we did so many things which I never did before. And he was worked for Prestolite, and he entertained, or we went to theaters and just went all over, and belonged to Detroit Golf Club, which didn't impress me because I don't enjoy that sort of thing, Anyway, but then he that's when I went to Greenbrier, and I told you that we had been there, and so anyway, that's we just